The iron seared into Lucy Jensen's palm before she could drop it, and the smell of her own burning flesh mixed with the acrid smoke of cowhide as she stumbled backward into the dusty Colorado corral, biting down hard on her lip to keep from screaming because she would not give the ranch hands another reason to doubt her. Her father had been dead 3 weeks, buried on the hill overlooking the ranch he had built from nothing in the vast stretch of land outside Alamosa, Colorado. And Lucy had inherited everything including the debts, the failing cattle operation, and the skeptical looks from every man who worked the property. It was May of 1883, and spring branding season waited for no one, least of all a 22-year-old woman who had spent most of her life learning ranch management from her father, but had never actually worked the cattle herself. The hands her father employed had scattered like tumbleweeds the moment they learned a woman would be running things, taking their pay and heading for ranches with more promising futures, leaving Lucy with 50 head of unbranded cattle, burned hands from her first disastrous attempt at the work, and a growing sense that she might lose everything her father had built. She cradled her right hand against her chest, feeling the blisters already forming across her palm where the hot iron had slipped in her grip, and fought against the tears that wanted to come, because crying would not brand the cattle or save the ranch or prove to anyone that she deserved to be here. The morning sun beat down on the corral with relentless intensity, and dust hung in the air like a veil, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that stuck to her sweat-dampened skin. 3 unbranded yearlings milled nervously in the pen, sensing her pain and uncertainty, their eyes rolling white as they pressed against the far fence. Lucy had spent the previous evening heating the branding iron in the fire pit, practicing her grip on the wooden handle, imagining how she would press it firmly against the hide of each animal to leave the clear mark of the Double J brand her father had registered 15 years ago. But imagination and reality were vastly different things, and the weight of the iron combined with the awkward angle required to hold a calf still had resulted in the heated metal touching her own flesh instead of the animal's. The pain had been instant and overwhelming, a searing agony that shot up her arm and made her vision blur, but she had forced herself to stay upright, to breathe through it, to pick up the iron again with her left hand, even though she knew that attempting to brand left-handed would likely result in another injury. "You are going to get yourself killed trying to do this alone." The voice came from behind her, deep and rough, with a hint of concern that made Lucy spin around despite the pain radiating through her hand. A man stood just outside the corral fence, one boot propped on the lower rail, his arms crossed over a dusty chambray shirt that had seen better days. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who spent every day working hard physical labor. Dark hair fell across his forehead beneath a worn brown hat, and his eyes were an unexpected shade of blue-gray that seemed to see right through her defenses. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with the sun-weathered skin of someone who lived outdoors and a jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. "I did not ask for your opinion or your help," Lucy said, hearing the defensive edge in her own voice and hating it because it made her sound exactly like what she was, a frightened woman in over her head. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet those unsettling eyes even as her hand throbbed with each heartbeat. "This is my ranch, and I will manage it as I see fit." The man did not move, did not drop his gaze or show any sign of being intimidated by her words. Instead, he studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then his eyes dropped to the hand she held against her chest. "Your hand is burned," he said, and it was not a question but a simple statement of fact delivered without judgment. You need to treat that burn before infection sets in, and you need someone to finish the branding before those cattle get any more skittish. I can manage, Lucy insisted, even though they both knew it was not true. She could barely hold anything with her right hand, and her left hand lacked the strength and coordination to manage a branding iron safely. But admitting weakness felt like admitting defeat, and she had already lost so much that surrendering even an inch of ground seemed impossible. The man shifted his weight, uncrossing his arms and settling both feet on the ground. "I am sure you could manage eventually," he said, his tone mild and conversational, as though they were discussing the weather instead of her complete lack of options. "But eventually might be too late. Those cattle need to be branded before they get mixed up with someone else's herd, and you need to get that hand treated before the burn gets worse." He paused, then added, "I could do the branding for you. No charge, no strings, just helping a neighbor." Pride warred with practicality in Lucy's chest, a familiar battle she had fought many times since her father's death. Pride said she should refuse, should prove she could handle everything alone, should not accept help from a stranger who might have ulterior motives. Practicality said she needed the help desperately, that the cattle represented a significant portion of her assets, and that her burned hand was already compromising her ability to do any work at all. She studied the man carefully, looking for signs of mockery or condescension, but found only patient waiting in his expression. "Why would you help me?" she asked finally, needing to understand his motivation before she could even consider accepting. "You do not know me, and you have nothing to gain from branding my cattle." Something flickered across his face, an emotion too quick to identify, and then he shrugged one shoulder. "Maybe I just do not like seeing someone hurt themselves when there is an easier way," he said. "Or maybe I remember what it is like to be alone and struggling, and I figure helping when I can is the right thing to do." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with those sharp eyes. "Does the reason matter if the help is genuine?" Lucy wanted to argue, wanted to find some flaw in his logic or some reason to refuse, but the truth was that she needed help, and he was offering it freely. Her hand throbbed insistently, reminding her that she would not be able to do any work until it healed, and the cattle could not wait that long. "What is your name?" she asked, making a decision she hoped she would not regret. "Ryan Ellis," he said, and something in the way he said it made Lucy think he had not introduced himself to many people recently, as though the name felt rusty on his tongue. "I have been working ranches in the area for the past few months, and I am decent with cattle and branding irons." "Lucy Jensen," she replied, matching his formal tone with her own. "This is the Double J Ranch, and I inherited it from my father 3 weeks ago." She hesitated, then added, "I would appreciate the help with the branding, but I insist on paying you for your work. I will not accept charity." Ryan nodded slowly, as though this was exactly the response he had expected. "Fair enough," he said. "Standard day rate for ranch work, and a meal if you have one to spare." He moved toward the gate of the corral, his movements economical and confident, and Lucy found herself stepping aside to let him enter even though this was her property, and she should be the one granting access. "The iron is in the fire pit over there," she said, pointing with her uninjured hand toward the small, contained fire she had built earlier. "It should still be hot enough to use, but you might need to heat it again depending on how many cattle you can do before it cools." Ryan walked over to the fire pit and studied the iron for a moment, then glanced back at her with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and practical. "Before I start this, you need to get that hand into cool water and then treat the burn properly," he said. "If you have aloe or honey in the house, use that. Wrap it in clean cloth and try to keep it dry and protected. Burned skin is vulnerable to infection, and out here, infection can kill you as surely as a bullet. The blunt assessment startled Lucy into honesty. "I have honey in the kitchen," she admitted, looking down at her injured palm. The skin was already blistering, angry red marks spreading across the flesh in a pattern that matched the branding iron's handle. "And clean bandages that belonged to my father." "Go take care of it," Ryan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I will get started on these cattle and we can settle up on payment later." He picked up the branding iron with the easy confidence of someone who had done this work 1,000 times before, testing its weight and heat with a practiced eye. "You have a good brand design. Clean lines, easy to read. Your father chose well." The casual mention of her father hit Lucy harder than she expected, a sharp pang of grief that made her throat tighten. "He designed it himself when he first started the ranch," she said, her voice rougher than she intended. "The double J for Jensen. He always said a man's brand was his legacy, the mark he left on the world." She paused, then corrected herself quietly. "Or a woman's brand, I suppose." Ryan looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. "Legacy is not just about the mark you leave," he said. "It is about whether you have the courage to carry on when things get hard, and the strength to ask for help when you need it." He turned back to the cattle, effectively ending the conversation. "Now go take care of that hand before I have to stop this work and drag you to the house myself." Lucy wanted to bristle at the command, but the stubborn concern in his voice undermined her irritation. She nodded once, acknowledging both his point and his help, then made her way across the dusty yard toward the ranch house. It was a modest structure, 2 stories with a covered porch that wrapped around the front and side, built from local timber and stone that had weathered to a soft gray. Her father had added rooms as money allowed, creating a home that was functional rather than beautiful but sturdy enough to withstand Colorado's harsh winters and hot summers. The kitchen was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside, and Lucy blinked as her eyes adjusted to the change. She pumped water into a basin with her good hand, then carefully lowered her burned palm into the coolness. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, a lessening of the sharp pain that had been her constant companion for the past hour. She held her hand in the water for several minutes, watching as the angry redness seemed to diminish slightly, and tried to organize her chaotic thoughts into something resembling a plan. Ryan Ellis was a stranger, appearing at exactly the moment she needed help most, and every instinct Lucy had developed growing up on a ranch told her to be cautious. Men did not offer help for free, especially not to women who owned valuable property. But there had been something in his eyes when he looked at her burned hand, a flash of genuine concern that seemed harder to fake than self-interest. And he had not asked intrusive questions about her situation or made assumptions about her capabilities, had simply offered to do a job that needed doing. Lucy carefully dried her hand on a clean towel, wincing at even the gentle pressure against her burned skin, then retrieved the honey jar from the pantry. Her father had kept bees as a side project, saying that honey was useful for everything from sweetening coffee to treating wounds. And now, Lucy was grateful for his foresight. She spread a thin layer of golden honey across the burn, feeling the cool stickiness coat the damaged skin, then wrapped her palm in clean strips of cloth torn from an old shirt. The bandage was clumsy, achieved mostly with her left hand and her teeth, but it would protect the burn from dirt and debris. Through the kitchen window, Lucy could see Ryan working in the corral. He had already roped one of the yearlings and wrestled it to the ground with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. The calf struggled briefly, then went still as Ryan positioned himself to apply the brand. He pressed the heated iron firmly against the animal's hide, holding it steady for the count of 3, then lifted it away cleanly. The double J mark stood out clearly against the red hide, and even from a distance, Lucy could tell it was a perfect brand. Clear edges, appropriate depth, positioned exactly where it should be on the animal's flank. She watched as Ryan released the calf and moved to rope the next one, his movements fluid and confident. There was a grace to the way he worked, an economy of motion that came from years of experience. He handled the cattle firmly, but not roughly, getting the job done efficiently while causing the animals as little stress as possible. It was the mark of a good cowhand, someone who understood that cattle were valuable assets that needed to be treated with respect, rather than just obstacles to be overcome. Lucy made coffee while she watched him work, needing something to occupy her hands, and knowing that offering hospitality was the proper thing to do when someone was helping with ranch work. The familiar ritual of grinding beans and boiling water soothed her rattled nerves, giving her something concrete to focus on besides the ache in her hand and the chaos of her situation. By the time Ryan finished branding the last yearling, she had strong coffee ready and had managed to cut slices of bread and cheese with her left hand, arranging them on a plate with only minor frustration. Ryan appeared on the porch a few minutes later, dust-covered and sweat-stained but looking satisfied with his work. He removed his hat as he approached the door, a gesture of courtesy that seemed almost old-fashioned, and waited for Lucy's nod of permission before entering the kitchen. "All 3 are done," he reported, moving to the wash basin to rinse the grime from his hands and face. "Clean brands placed properly. They should heal up well if you keep an eye out for infection over the next few days." "Thank you," Lucy said, and meant it. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and gestured toward the table. "Please sit. I made lunch, such as it is." Ryan accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks and settled into one of the wooden chairs, his large frame making the simple furniture look almost delicate. He took a sip of the coffee, and something in his expression relaxed. "This is good," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Most ranch coffee tastes like boiled boot leather, but this is actually drinkable." "My father believed that good coffee was one of life's essential pleasures," Lucy said, taking the chair across from him and cradling her own cup in her uninjured hand. "He taught me to make it properly when I was 12, and I have been making it the same way ever since." She pushed the plate of bread and cheese toward him. "It is not much, but you are welcome to it." Ryan took a slice of bread and some cheese, eating with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely hungry. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the quiet broken only by the sound of eating and drinking and the distant lowing of cattle outside. Lucy found herself studying Ryan more carefully now that he was sitting across from her in the bright kitchen light. His face was angular and strong-featured, with a straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to frowning than smiling. But his hands, wrapped around the coffee cup, were careful and precise despite their obvious strength, and there was an alertness in his eyes that suggested he missed very little. "Where are you from originally?" Lucy asked, breaking the silence because the question had been building in her mind since he first appeared at her corral. "You said you have been working ranches in the area, but you do not sound like you are from Colorado." Ryan set down his coffee cup, his expression becoming guarded in a way that made Lucy regret asking. "I am from Kansas originally," he said after a pause. "My family had a small farm there, but that was a long time ago. I have been moving around for the past few years, working where I can find it, trying to save up enough money to start my own place someday. There was a weight of untold story behind those simple words, a history that Ryan clearly had no intention of sharing with a stranger. Lucy recognized the reticence because she felt it herself, the desire to keep painful things private rather than exposing them to curiosity or judgment. "Kansas must be very different from Colorado," she said, offering an easier topic. "Flatter, I would imagine, and more humid." "Very different," Ryan agreed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Colorado has the mountains and the altitude and air so dry it cracks your skin, but I like it here. There is something about the space, the way you can see for miles in every direction, that makes a man feel like he can breathe." He paused, then added, "What about you? Are you Colorado born and raised?" Lucy nodded. "Born right here in this house," she said. "My mother died when I was 5, and after that, it was just my father and me. He raised me to help run the ranch, taught me everything he knew about cattle and horses and land management." She looked down at her bandaged hand, remembering all the times her father had patiently shown her how to do something, never losing his temper when she made mistakes. "But he never taught me the physical labor part. He always had hands to do the branding and roping and heavy work, and he wanted me to focus on the business side of things, learning to keep books, understanding market prices, managing supplies and payroll." "That knowledge is just as valuable," Ryan said. "Maybe more valuable, actually. Anyone can learn to brand a cow with enough practice, but understanding how to run a profitable operation is a skill that takes real intelligence." The unexpected compliment made Lucy's cheeks warm, and she took a hasty sip of coffee to cover her reaction. "The problem is that all the business knowledge in the world does not help when the physical work needs to be done, and there is no one to do it," she said. "My father's ranch hands left when he died. They did not want to work for a woman, and I could not convince them to stay." The admission cost her something, exposing a vulnerability she preferred to keep hidden. "I have been trying to do everything myself, but as you saw this morning, that is not working very well." Ryan finished his bread and cheese, considering her words carefully before responding. "You need to hire new hands," he said. "Men who understand that a ranch is only as good as its management, regardless of whether that management wears pants or a skirt. They exist. You just need to find them and convince them you are serious about running this place properly." "And where exactly do I find these enlightened men?" Lucy asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Because in my experience, most cowboys would rather work for the devil himself than take orders from a woman." "You found one this morning," Ryan pointed out, his tone matter of fact. "I am working for you right now, and I do not have any problem with it." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those keen eyes. "Look, I am not going to pretend that you will not face resistance and skepticism. You will, constantly, because people have fixed ideas about what women can and cannot do. But there are good men out there who care more about fair pay and decent treatment than they do about the gender of their boss. You just need to make it clear that you run a professional operation and expect professional behavior in return." Lucy wanted to believe him, wanted to think that building a crew of reliable ranch hands was actually possible rather than just a desperate fantasy. "Are you looking for steady work?" she asked, the question coming out before she had fully considered it. "I cannot pay much right now, not until I sell some cattle, but I can offer room and board and a fair wage once the ranch starts turning a profit again." Ryan went very still, his expression unreadable, and for a long moment Lucy thought he would refuse. Then he set down his coffee cup and met her eyes directly. "I appreciate the offer," he said slowly, "but I should be honest with you about something first." He paused, clearly weighing his words. I am not running from the law or anything like that, but I am trying to keep a low profile. I had some trouble back in Kansas, family trouble, and I left rather than make things worse. I do not use my last name much, and I move around fairly regularly to avoid being found. The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Lucy heard the honesty beneath the vague words. Whatever had happened in Kansas, it clearly still haunted Ryan enough that he felt obligated to warn her about it. "Are you dangerous?" she asked bluntly, needing to know if she was putting herself at risk by having him on the property. "Will your trouble follow you here and put my ranch in jeopardy?" "No," Ryan said firmly. "I am not dangerous, at least not to anyone who is not trying to hurt me or mine, and the trouble I left behind was personal, not criminal. My family wanted me to do something I could not do, marry someone I did not love for reasons that had nothing to do with happiness, and when I refused, things got ugly. I left to avoid making a bad situation worse, and I have been keeping my distance ever since." He held her gaze steadily. "I will not bring trouble to your door, Miss Jensen. You have my word on that." Lucy considered his words, weighing risk against need and instinct against practicality. Her father had always said that you could tell a lot about a person by how they treated animals and how they kept their word. Ryan had handled her cattle with competent care, and had been honest with her about his situation when he could have easily lied or omitted the truth. Those were points in his favor, and she desperately needed help if she was going to save the ranch. "All right," she said, making a decision that felt both reckless and right. "I will offer you a job, Ryan Ellis, if you are willing to take it. Room and board starting immediately, plus a monthly wage once I can afford to pay it. In return, I need you to help me run this ranch and teach me everything I should know about the physical work I never learned." Ryan studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You are serious about that last part? You want me to teach you the actual ranch work, not just do it for you?" "Completely serious," Lucy confirmed. "I cannot run this place if I do not know how to do every job required, and I will not be dependent on anyone else's skills if I can help it. My burned hand proves that I need proper instruction, but once I heal, I want to learn everything. Roping, branding, fence repair, breaking horses, all of it." A slow smile crossed Ryan's face, the first real smile Lucy had seen from him, and it transformed his entire appearance. He went from guarded and worn to almost boyish, the expression lighting up his eyes and softening the hard lines of his face. "Then I accept your offer, Miss Jensen," he said. "Though I should warn you that I am not always the most patient teacher, and learning ranch work is hard, sometimes painful, and often frustrating." "I think I can handle frustration," Lucy said dryly, holding up her bandaged hand. "I have already experienced the painful part and I am still here. Besides, I suspect I am not always the easiest person to teach. I have a stubborn streak that my father said could rival a mule's." "Good," Ryan said unexpectedly. "You will need that stubborn streak if you are going to make this ranch succeed. The easy thing would be to sell this place and move somewhere civilized, but you are staying and fighting for what is yours. That takes guts, Miss Jensen, more than a lot of people have." The straightforward compliment, and the understanding behind it, touched something deep in Lucy's chest, a place that had felt cold and isolated since her father's death. For the first time in weeks, she felt like someone saw her as more than just a woman in over her head, recognized the determination and courage it took to keep fighting when everything seemed stacked against success. "Call me Lucy," she said impulsively. "If we are going to be working together closely, formality seems unnecessary." Ryan nodded slowly. "Lucy, then, and you can call me Ryan, though most people just call me Ellis when we are working." They finished their coffee in companionable silence, the beginning of a partnership forming between them like the slow growth of trust. Lucy knew she was taking a risk bringing Ryan into her life and her home, but risk was unavoidable when you were trying to build something worth having. Her father had taken risks when he started this ranch, had gambled everything on his ability to make a life in the harsh Colorado landscape, and Lucy was determined to honor that legacy by taking her own chances on what felt right rather than what felt safe. Over the next few weeks, Lucy learned more about ranch work than she had in her entire previous life. Ryan proved to be a demanding teacher, patient with genuine mistakes but intolerant of carelessness or half-effort. He taught her how to properly rope a calf, how to read cattle behavior to predict problems before they started, how to repair fence lines so it would hold against determined livestock, and dozens of other skills that her father had never thought to teach his daughter. Lucy's burned hand healed slowly, the blistered skin eventually giving way to new pink flesh that was tender but functional, and she worked through the discomfort because stopping meant admitting weakness she could not afford. They fell into a rhythm, rising before dawn to tend the animals and working until dusk drove them back to the house. Lucy cooked meals while Ryan handled the heavier evening chores, and they shared dinner at the kitchen table while discussing the next day's work and the ongoing challenges of running an understaffed ranch. It was exhausting, physically demanding work that left Lucy's muscles aching and her hands blistered. But it was also deeply satisfying in a way that bookkeeping had never been. She was building something tangible, caring for living creatures, and seeing the direct results of her labor in healthy cattle and well-maintained property. Ryan proved to be more than just a skilled ranch hand. He had a natural gift for understanding animals, an intuition that told him when a cow was about to calve, or when a horse was developing lameness before visible symptoms appeared. He could read weather patterns in the clouds and wind, predict when they needed to move cattle to different pasture, and identify the subtle signs of predators or rustlers in the area. More than once, his sharp eyes and quick thinking prevented problems that could have cost Lucy dearly, and she began to understand that she had stumbled into extraordinary luck the day he appeared at her corral. But beyond his practical skills, Ryan was also surprisingly good company. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly, making Lucy laugh during long days of hard work. He told stories about his travels, painting vivid pictures of different ranches and towns he had worked, and he listened when Lucy talked about her father and her memories of growing up on the Double J. They debated everything from the best way to treat colic in horses to whether Colorado would ever be as settled as Kansas, and Lucy found herself looking forward to their evening conversations as much as she appreciated his daytime help. Somewhere in the midst of learning and working and talking, Lucy realized that her feelings for Ryan had shifted from gratitude and respect into something far more complicated and frightening. She noticed the way his hands moved with casual competence, the sound of his laugh, the rare smiles that seemed to be appearing more frequently as he relaxed around her. She found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice, memorizing the line of his shoulders and the way he tilted his head when he was concentrating. And she caught him watching her sometimes too, his blue-gray eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her breath catch. It was dangerous, this growing attraction between them, because mixing business with personal feelings could destroy both. Lucy knew she should maintain professional distance, should keep Ryan firmly in the category of employee rather than friend or potential lover. But knowing what she should do and being able to do it were very different things. And as summer deepened into the hot Colorado July, She found it increasingly difficult to ignore the way her heart raced when Ryan smiled at her, or the flutter of awareness that ran through her when their hands accidentally touched. They were mending fence on the north pasture when everything changed. It was a brutally hot afternoon, the kind where the sun beat down like a physical weight and the air shimmered with heat waves. Lucy was working on replacing a broken post, digging out the old wood and preparing the hole for new timber, when her shovel struck something solid that was definitely not rock. Curious, she scraped away more dirt, revealing what looked like a metal box about the size of a saddle bag. "Ryan, come look at this," she called, brushing away more soil to reveal the full outline of the buried container. Ryan appeared at her side, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, and studied the box with a frown. "That is interesting," he said. "Looks old. Someone buried it deliberately, probably years ago." Together they worked to excavate the box, prying it loose from the earth that had held it for what must have been decades. The metal was rusted but still intact, and there was a heavy lock on the front that had corroded into uselessness. Ryan used a fence post to break the lock, and Lucy carefully lifted the lid, not sure what to expect. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had partially deteriorated, were bundles of paper money and several leather pouches that clinked with the sound of coins. Lucy stared at the contents, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. There had to be thousands of dollars in the box, maybe tens of thousands, an absolute fortune that someone had buried on her property and apparently never retrieved. "That is a lot of money," Ryan said quietly, echoing her thoughts. "Someone's life savings, maybe, or the proceeds from something they wanted to hide." Lucy carefully lifted one of the bundles of bills, noting the dates and denominations. "These are old," she said. "From the 1860s and 1870s. Whoever buried this has probably been dead for years." She looked up at Ryan, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his expression. "What do we do with this?" "It is your property," Ryan pointed out. "Found on your land, which makes it legally yours unless someone can prove a competing claim." He paused, then added carefully, "That money could solve a lot of your financial problems. You could pay off your father's debts, hire a full crew, buy new equipment, maybe even expand your herd." It was true, and the temptation was enormous. Lucy could transform the struggling Double J into a thriving operation with this windfall, could secure her future, and honor her father's legacy without the constant fear of failure hanging over her head. But the money felt strange in her hands, like a gift that came with invisible strings attached. "It feels wrong somehow," she said slowly. "Like I would be stealing even though there is no one to steal from." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an expression she could not quite read. Then he said, "The fact that you feel that way says a lot about your character, Lucy. Most people would just take the money and not look back." He reached out and gently closed the lid of the box. "But I think you are right to be cautious. Maybe we should try to find out who buried this and whether they have any living relatives before you decide what to do with it." The suggestion was sensible and ethical, and it reinforced Lucy's growing belief that Ryan Ellis was a fundamentally good man. They carefully reburied the box, marking the location so they could find it again, and agreed to start asking questions around a Lamosa about who might have owned this section of land before Lucy's father bought it. It would take time, and it might not lead anywhere, but at least Lucy would know she had tried to do the right thing before claiming the money as her own. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Ryan broke the companionable silence with a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Why did you never marry?" he asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "You do not have to answer." But Lucy found she wanted to answer, wanted to share this piece of herself with him. "I never found anyone who saw me as a partner rather than as property," she said honestly. "The men who courted me wanted a wife who would keep house and bear children, not someone who wanted to run a ranch and make business decisions. And my father never pushed me to marry, said I should wait until I found someone who respected my mind as much as my face." She glanced at Ryan, seeing him in profile against the fading light. "What about you? You mentioned your family wanted you to marry someone, but you refused. Was there ever anyone you wanted to marry?" Ryan was quiet for so long that Lucy thought he might not answer. Then he said, "There was a woman I cared about back in Kansas. She was kind and smart, and we enjoyed each other's company. But I did not love her, not the way a man should love the woman he marries, and I knew that settling for less than that would make both of us miserable eventually." He turned to look at Lucy directly. "My family owned the farm next to hers, and our parents thought a marriage between us would be convenient, would merge the properties and create a bigger, more profitable operation. But I could not do it, could not trap myself and her in a loveless marriage just for financial gain." "That must have been difficult," Lucy said softly, understanding now the weight of what Ryan had given up. "Walking away from your family and your home because you would not compromise on something that important." "It was the hardest thing I have ever done," Ryan admitted, "but I do not regret it. I would rather spend my life searching for something real than settle for something convenient." He paused, then added in a voice barely above a whisper, "I think I might have found something real here, Lucy. Something I was not even looking for." Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs, the implication of his words clear even though he had not said anything explicit. She could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that whatever she said next would determine the course of both their futures. "I think I have found something real too," she said, matching his quiet tone. "Something unexpected and complicated and probably inadvisable given that you work for me, and we have only known each other a few months." Ryan turned fully toward her, his eyes searching her face in the gathering darkness. "But real nonetheless," he said. "Important, regardless of the complications." "Yes," Lucy breathed, and then Ryan was leaning toward her and she was meeting him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though they were both afraid of pushing too hard or moving too fast. But then Ryan's hand came up to cup Lucy's cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin, and Lucy leaned into the touch, into him, deepening the kiss with a hunger that surprised them both. She tasted coffee and dust, and something that was purely Ryan, and she wanted more, wanted to explore this connection that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryan rested his forehead against Lucy's and said, "I am not good at pretty words or fancy courtship. But I care about you, Lucy Jensen, more than I have ever cared about anyone, and I want to build something with you if you will have me." "I care about you too," Lucy said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I think I have been falling in love with you since the day you took that branding iron from my burned hands and did the work without making me feel weak for needing help." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "But I need you to understand that I will not give up this ranch or my independence, not even for love. I have fought too hard to keep this place to surrender it now." "I would never ask you to," Ryan said fiercely. "I fell in love with a strong, stubborn, capable woman who brands her own cattle and runs her own ranch. Why would I want you to be anything other than who you are?" He kissed her again, quick and hard. "We will build this together, partners in every sense, or we will not build it at all." The promise hung in the air between them, as binding as any formal vow, and Lucy felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that this was right, that Ryan was right, that together they could face whatever challenges came their way. They sat on the porch until full darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly about their hopes and fears, and the future they wanted to create together. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and expanded in ways that felt both natural and extraordinary. They continued working the ranch together during the day, but now there was an added dimension of awareness, a connection that hummed between them even during the most mundane tasks. Ryan taught Lucy to rope with patient persistence, and when she finally managed to catch a calf cleanly on her 20th attempt, he picked her up and spun her around in celebration, both of them laughing like children. Lucy taught Ryan her father's system for tracking cattle weights and market trends, and he picked up the bookkeeping skills with surprising aptitude, his careful mind well suited to the detailed work. They investigated the buried money during their rare moments of free time, talking to older residents of Alamosa and researching property records at the county office. Eventually, they traced the land back to a prospector named William Harding, who had owned it briefly in the early 1870s, before selling it to Lucy's father and disappearing without a trace. Further investigation revealed that Harding had died in a mining accident in Nevada in 1878, leaving no known heirs. The money, it seemed, was truly Lucy's to claim with a clear conscience. With the windfall, Lucy was able to pay off her father's remaining debts and hire 2 additional ranch hands, carefully chosen men who cared more about fair treatment than about the gender of their employer. The Double J began to transform from a struggling operation into a profitable one, the cattle healthy and well-maintained, the property improving with each passing month. Lucy felt her father's dream coming back to life under her hands and Ryan's, a legacy preserved and strengthened by their combined efforts. But more important than the ranch's success was the deepening love between Lucy and Ryan. They talked about marriage in the abstract, both wanting it but also wanting to make sure the timing was right, and the decision was made for the right reasons. Lucy worried about how marriage might change their partnership, whether legal bonds would shift the equal footing they had established. Ryan worried about his past catching up with them, about bringing trouble to Lucy's door despite his best efforts to avoid it. The decision was made for them on a crisp October morning when a rider appeared at the ranch, a middle-aged woman with Ryan's eyes and a determined set to her jaw. She introduced herself as Ryan Ellis, Ryan's older sister, and she had tracked him down through a combination of persistence and luck. Ryan went pale when he saw her, but he invited her into the house with the courtesy bred into him, and Lucy made coffee while brother and sister faced each other across the kitchen table. "Ma is dying," Rosemary said without preamble, her voice heavy with grief. "Cancer, the doctor says. She has maybe a month left, and she wants to see you before the end. Wants to apologize for the pressure she put on you about marrying Clara, and to tell you she loves you regardless of your choices." Ryan closed his eyes, pain washing across his face. "Is she really dying, or is this a trick to get me to come home?" "She is really dying," Rosemary said gently. "I would not lie about something like that, little brother, and Pa is a broken man seeing her fade. They both regret how things ended between you, and Ma wants to make peace before it is too late." Lucy reached over and took Ryan's hand, offering silent support while he processed this information. She could see the conflict in his expression, the desire to see his mother warring with the fear of being manipulated or pressured again. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. Ryan looked at her, his eyes full of uncertainty and pain. "I want to see my mother one last time," he admitted. "But I am afraid that going back means getting trapped in all the expectations and obligations I ran from." Then we will go together, Lucy said firmly, making the decision in an instant. I will go with you to Kansas, meet your family, and be there to support you through this. And if anyone tries to trap or manipulate you, they will have to go through me first. The fierce protectiveness in her voice made Ryan smile despite the circumstances. You would really do that? Leave the ranch and travel to Kansas with me? The ranch will be fine for a few weeks with the hands we hired, Lucy said. And yes, I would really do that. You have been there for me since the day we met. Now it is my turn to be there for you. Rosemary watched this exchange with sharp interest, and something like approval crossed her face. You must be Lucy, she said. Ryan wrote to me about you, about the ranch, and how happy he is here. I am glad he found someone worth staying for. He wrote to you? Lucy asked, surprised because Ryan had never mentioned maintaining contact with his family. Once a month, like clockwork, Rosemary confirmed. Short letters that did not say where he was staying, but enough to let me know he was alive and well. I did not tell Ma and Pa because I knew Ryan needed space, but I always wrote back care of general delivery in Denver, hoping he would pick up my letters. She looked at her brother fondly. You are not as alone as you think, Ryan. Your family loves you, even when we disagree with your choices. They made arrangements to travel to Kansas the following week, giving Lucy time to ensure the ranch was in order and Ryan time to mentally prepare for the reunion. The train journey east was long and exhausting, but Lucy found she did not mind the discomfort because Ryan held her hand for most of the trip and talked more openly about his childhood than he ever had before. She learned about his father's stern discipline and high expectations, his mother's gentler nature, and the weight of being the only son in a farming family where sons were supposed to carry on the legacy. The Ellis farm was smaller than Lucy had expected, a modest spread of wheat fields and pasture that looked well maintained, but not prosperous. Ryan's father was a tall, weathered man who greeted his son with gruff emotion, pulling Ryan into a brief, fierce hug before stepping back as though embarrassed by the display. His mother was in bed, frighteningly thin and pale, but her eyes lit up when Ryan entered the room. Lucy waited outside the bedroom, giving them privacy for their reunion, and she could hear the murmur of voices and occasional tears through the door. When Ryan finally emerged an hour later, his eyes were red, but his expression was peaceful. Thank you for pushing me to come, he said, pulling Lucy into his arms. I needed to do this, needed to make peace before it was too late. They stayed in Kansas for 3 weeks, long enough to say proper goodbyes and to help the Ellis family prepare for the difficult time ahead. Lucy got to know Ryan's family, sharing meals and stories, and slowly earning their respect despite being the woman who had taken their son away from Kansas. She saw where Ryan got his stubborn integrity and his capacity for hard work, and she understood better the pressures that had driven him to leave. Ryan's mother passed quietly in her sleep 2 weeks after they arrived, and the funeral was a simple affair attended by neighbors and family. Afterward, Ryan's father pulled him aside for a private conversation that lasted well into the evening. When Ryan returned to Lucy, he looked exhausted but lighter somehow, as though a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Pa said he was sorry for trying to force me into a life I did not want, Ryan told her. Said he and Ma talked a lot in her final weeks, and she helped him understand that holding on too tight just drives people away. He gave us his blessing, Lucy. Said that anyone who would travel halfway across the country to support me through hard times is someone worth keeping. I am someone worth keeping, Lucy agreed, trying to lighten the mood with a teasing tone. I am also someone who is very ready to go home to Colorado if you are. More than ready, Ryan said. Kansas is my past, but Colorado is my future. our future if you will still have me." "Always," Lucy promised, and meant it with everything she had. They returned to Alamosa in late November, finding the ranch in good condition, and the cattle thriving under the care of the hired hands. But the trip to Kansas had changed something fundamental in their relationship, had proven that they could face difficult situations together and come through stronger. Ryan proposed properly on Christmas Eve, getting down on one knee in front of the fireplace with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and Lucy said yes, without hesitation. They married in early spring of 1884, a small ceremony in Alamosa attended by friends and the ranch hands who had become something like family. Lucy wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a cedar chest, and Ryan wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. The local minister performed the ceremony, and they exchanged vows promising to love and support each other as equal partners for as long as they both lived. The wedding night was a revelation, a coming together that felt both inevitable and miraculous. Ryan was tender and patient, taking the time to learn what Lucy liked and needed, and Lucy discovered a passion in herself she had not known existed. They made love with the windows open to the cool spring air, the sounds of the ranch drifting in to remind them of the life they were building together. And afterward, they lay tangled together talking about the future they would create. True to their vows, Lucy and Ryan ran the Double J as equal partners. They worked side by side during the day and planned strategy together in the evenings, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Lucy handled the business side, tracking markets and negotiating sales, while Ryan managed the day-to-day operations and trained the hands. But they made all major decisions together, talking through options and listening to each other's perspectives before choosing a course of action. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing steadily more profitable year by year. They expanded their herd, bought adjacent property when it became available, and earned a reputation for producing quality cattle and treating their employees fairly. Other ranchers began to grudgingly respect Lucy's business acumen, and more than one confessed that they had been wrong to doubt a woman's ability to run an operation successfully. Lucy became pregnant in the summer of 1884, and she continued working the ranch until she was nearly 8 months along, only stopping when Ryan threatened to bodily carry her into the house and lock her there for her own safety. Their first child, a son they named Robert after Ryan's father, was born in February of 1885, a healthy baby with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Ryan proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying infant without complaint, and Lucy found that she could balance motherhood with ranch work more easily than she had feared. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Margaret Rose, and 2 years after that, another son named Thomas. The ranch house echoed with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life, and Lucy discovered that the love she felt for Ryan only deepened as she watched him with their children. He was patient and playful, teaching them to ride almost before they could walk and telling them stories about the wild places he had traveled before settling in Colorado. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. Lucy and Ryan faced droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and injured livestock, but they faced everything together and emerged stronger each time. They grew old side by side, their hands equally weathered by work, and their faces equally lined by sun and laughter. The children grew up and made their own choices, Robert staying to help run the ranch, Margaret marrying a neighboring rancher's son, and Thomas heading east to become a lawyer. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Ryan gave Lucy a new branding iron as a gift. The design was the same double J that her father had created, but now there was a small E incorporated into the pattern, marking the ranch as belonging to both Jensen and Ellis bloodlines. They heated the iron together in the fire pit where Ryan had first branded Lucy's cattle all those years ago, and together they branded a new calf, their movements synchronized from decades of working side by side. "You ever regret it?" Lucy asked as they watched the calf rejoin its mother. "Staying here instead of starting your own ranch like you originally planned?" Ryan turned to look at her, and his eyes held the same warmth and love they had shown that first day when he took a hot branding iron from her burned hands. "This is my own ranch," he said firmly. "Ours together, built with our hands and our hearts. I have never regretted a single day, Lucy Ellis. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and this life we built is more than I ever dreamed possible." Lucy leaned into her husband's embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him and the strength that came from knowing they belonged to each other completely. The Colorado sun beat down on the Double J Ranch, illuminating the cattle bearing their combined brand and the land they had worked and loved for over 2 decades. It had all started with burned hands and an act of kindness, a cowboy taking a branding iron and doing the work that needed to be done. But it had grown into something far greater than either of them could have anticipated. A love that endured, a partnership that flourished, and a legacy that would continue long after they were both gone. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life, each season bringing its own challenges and rewards. Lucy and Ryan celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 40th, growing old with grace and gratitude. Robert took over more of the ranch operations as his parents slowed down, proving to be as capable as Lucy had been, and as skilled as Ryan in the physical demands of cattle ranching. He married a schoolteacher from Alamosa and gave Lucy and Ryan 6 grandchildren who ran through the ranch house with the same energy their father had shown as a child. Margaret's marriage produced 4 grandchildren, and she often brought them to visit the Double J, letting them learn from their grandparents about cattle and horses and the importance of hard work. Thomas, though he had chosen a different path, remained close to the family and brought his wife and 2 children back to Colorado every summer without fail. The ranch house that had once held just Lucy and her father now overflowed with family during holidays, 3 generations gathering to share meals and stories and love. Lucy and Ryan spent their later years mostly supervising rather than doing the heavy physical labor, offering advice and guidance while younger hands did the work. They sat on the porch in rocking chairs Ryan had built, watching the ranch continue to thrive under Robert's management and taking satisfaction in knowing their legacy was secure. Lucy's hair had gone completely white, and Ryan moved more slowly than he once had, but their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered decades together. On a warm summer evening in 1909, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them, Lucy looked at Ryan across the crowded table and felt her heart swell with gratitude. They had built something extraordinary together, something that went beyond land or cattle or money. They had created a family, a community, a life full of meaning and purpose and love. Ryan caught her looking and raised his glass in a private toast, his eyes telling her everything his words did not need to say. Lucy raised her own glass in return, acknowledging all they had shared and overcome and built together. Their story had begun with burned hands and a simple act of kindness, but it had become something legendary in the local area, a tale people told about the woman who had fought to save her ranch, and the cowboy who had loved her enough to help her succeed. When Lucy passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73 in 1934, Ryan was holding her hand just as he had held it through all the important moments of their life together. He followed her 6 months later, his body simply giving up once the woman he loved was gone. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the Double J Ranch, their shared headstone bearing both their names and the simple inscription, "Partners in life, partners in love, together forever." Robert continued to run the ranch successfully, passing it down to his own children when the time came, and the Double J remained in the family for generations. The story of how Lucy Jensen had fought to save her father's ranch, and how Ryan Ellis had appeared at exactly the right moment to help her became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of courage, love, and the power of partnership. The original branding iron that Ryan had taken from Lucy's burned hands was preserved and displayed in the ranch house, a tangible reminder of where everything had started. And every spring during branding season, someone would tell the story again, keeping alive the memory of the woman who refused to give up and the cowboy who loved her enough to build a life worth living. Their love story had become woven into the fabric of the Double J Ranch, as permanent and enduring as the brand they had burned into the hides of countless cattle over the years, a mark that declared to the world, "This is ours, built together, and meant to last."